Game developers. What is something gamers on the internet always claim to be easy to do or fix, when in reality it's a real pain in the butt? Adding multiplayer to a single player game. Making a multiplayer game is okay, but adding multiplayer usually involves rewriting a lot of code. From experience, those bugs that we have no idea how to reproduce are the worst. People can only give vague descriptions like it just stopped like that, and then you spend hours unsuccessfully trying to have the same issue. Convincing managers something is worth the effort. Those who don't actually make games or know how they're made somehow make all the big decisions. I believe this is common in all industries, lol. I was told to just weld something unweldable a few minutes ago to make a customer happy. Least I get to say no because it's unsafe, but now I feel like the boss man be looking at me funny. Server maintenance, and the unforeseen delays on getting the servers back up on time, along with any number of reasons this gets delayed, specifically replies to people saying shouldn't they have tested for this stuff 1? That sentence was thrown around a lot during the New World beta. That's the point of the beta, to test the backend servers to make sure they work well. Pretty much everything you can imagine, as even if the change itself is simple, it's constrained by dependent systems and content. If I change jump height, any levels that have already been made with the old height in mind may have to be remade. If I change how crafting works, the inventory system may need a revision. If I add a cover mechanic, all levels must now be updated with cover objects, and AI needs to be updated to know what cover and cover objects means. If I add a third-person camera perspective to an FPS, each action that is animated in first person has to be reviewed for how it works in third person. Also, the levels have to be updated because the camera can now exist outside of the player character. If I change the speed at which the player character moves, level streaming may need an adjustment, and if the bottleneck is hardware speed, I may need to compromise on audio-visual fidelity instead. If my game uses FMV cutscenes, content design might be forced by what happens in those cutscenes. If it's not in the budget to render them again as the design changes, games are houses of cards more often than not. I love how I am scrolling through the comments and see pretty much every aspect of a game being listed, game designer and game developer commenting and just agreeing XD. For me personally, I work in research and QA right now, and let me tell you, QA is not just sitting around and playing the game. I'm sorry, but the game isn't even remotely finished and it's not balanced or fun at all just yet. So no, I am bored af going through the same motion, seeing every bit of the map for the 10th time, trying to find some bugs the programmers have to fix. It's just annoying. Yep, I did QA for a while, and even though I personally found it very fun from a problem-solving experience, it was far different than just playing the game. You sit through the same cutscenes hundreds of times, test out totally mundane actions like sending error report messages or picking up items, over and over and over again for hours. Why not just add an easy mode, hard mode? Yeah, and have to rebalance every single thing in the entire game a second time? That's no small task if you want the new mode to not be completely unfun. See, every game where the hard mode just turns the enemies into damage sponges and nothing else. Not a game dev, but I hear people saying, why don't they switch to X game engine? The new demo looks so pretty. I'm sure that is a simple task, right? S. Former AAA game developer. The hardest thing the internet asks for and thinks is easy is just add multiplayer. I worked at a primarily single player studio, and our current project was going to be the first multiplayer game we launched. It was a custom engine, so it had to be rewritten around the new network stack, and that was written by a single rockstar programmer, which means he owned it aggressively and got angry at you when it didn't work, which was frequently. So, integrating basic gameplay things like object move to new position on client, have the other client's update basically had to flow through him, and he was a major bottleneck but also invaluable to the company. So, the lesson here is that to add multiplayer, you need a decent team of knowledgeable network programmers, whose skills don't overlap with normal gameplay programmers that much. Second, once we got the framework running, we were able to start implementing systems and handing the hooks for those off to designers to start scripting on top of. They'd do things like if damage changed, flash character rate and play sound, that sort of stuff. Educating non-technical designers on how to write good multiplayer scripts was a non-trivial task, and that took a lot of development time fixing their bugs. Simple things where it would work on the client machine, but not the remote machine. Finally, the largest issue was deployment at scale. Several crappy things happening, like our publisher accidentally giving away a few thousand copies, but that's another story. Like I said, our tech stack was fairly rickety and new, so we had regular logon and profile issues, matchmaking problems where the matchmaker gave up too early, and game desync issues. All of these led directly to a low player population. And guess what makes matchmaking and bug finding even harder? Low player population. In the end, the plug was pulled shortly after launch, and the tech was recycled into another multiplayer game after we hired several more programmers and designers who had experience with these sorts of things. The project that launched after it was more successful. All in all, this process took about 6 years. Every single player game where the developer hasn't done a multiplayer game before would probably have to go through this, or similar, to make that game multiplayer. So when you say, just add multiplayer, that's around a $1 million ask, as an underestimate. The craft of game design is mostly invisible, despite what all those game design review YouTubers would tell you. Putting a game together is a million microscopic little things that nobody would ever realize. For example, yesterday I added a HUD display for the user's coin count. However, the game has a multiplier feature so that each coin you collect might actually be worth 2 coins, or 5 coins, or 100, or 43,584 coins. I wanted a nice little thing where instead of the HUD tally changing instantly, it would rapidly count up. So if you got 5 coins you'd see the counter go BRRRR and add all the numbers on one after the other. Except the speed that makes this look nice for 5 coins doesn't work when you just got 463,337 coins. I tested it and I had to wait over a minute for the HUD counter to catch up to the correct coin tally. Totally unusable. So it has to change the speed that it does the little count up animation based on how many coins you just got. So I wrote some code that dynamically increases the speed of the count up proportionally with larger numbers. That's just for a dang coin counter that nobody will ever look at twice. No game design YouTuber is going to point that out. No gamer will ever notice. But you'd notice if it was wrong. That's game development. Product owner, this is changing too fast. Makes me disoriented and confused. Get rid of it. Also product owner, I like the coin sounds that Candy Crush on my phone makes. Can you add that? Making design decisions. Every other gamer goes, why can't they just make an open world, sandbox, MMORPG, DMC combat party mechanic, battle royale but also MOBA with interactive story with moral choices and social links and multiple wafers and deep world, changing decisions and farming mechanics etc etc. These devs are lazy. Every other gamer thinks just because they can imagine it. Heck, not even imagine. Just remotely think about smashing 8 of their favorite games together in no particular controlled fashion. Quite often, simple design decisions have an insane impact for the rest of the game. While I don't play it myself, LOL is such an example. Change a single weapon on a single hero or character, IDK, and someone will find a new playstyle and a new meter until it's imbalanced and everyone doesn't blame the devs for it. Nobody's really said it yet, but from second-hand experience, sound, lots of layers, lots of optimization, lots of trigonometry, and when it fails, it's usually very noticeable, and especially so in a competitive game where players often rely on, or respond more quickly to, sound cues. A bit meta, but listening to any type of public opinion demand and applying it. If your game has any semblance of a community around it, chances are, people are complaining about something no matter what. The whole process of, identifying of your game actually have a problem, or if it's just a vocal minority complaining, or even if the thing they complain about that would be extremely problematic to be removed because of the purpose it was implemented in the first place. Identifying the problem. Players usually suggest about a lot of solutions without understanding a thing about how to keep the team's vision, how that logically work, why they are complaining etc etc. So we have to find the actual root of the complaints. Worry about budgeting and time constraints. No time to fix that bug that doesn't lock the game. The deadline is approaching. Never gets revisited. If an actual problem is found and there's money and time to fix it, figure out how, considering all the moving pieces of the game and what experience they're trying to convey. Test the heck out of it. Implement it. It still might still be buggy even with testing. People complain and send death threats anyway. I feel like many gamers do not realize how hard it is to fix design elements. It is often treated as if someone just needs to redraw it. The point is, that is just part of the work. You also need to incorporate that everywhere, and while I'm not a game dev, I can imagine that depending on what it is about and how modular it was programmed, this can get quite difficult. I don't understand why devs can't just fix this one little thing. Well, that one little thing is built off of a chain of logic that applies to a bunch of different things, and changing just one variable could very well fix this one little thing, but break everything else. Honestly, I would say it applies to the majority of game development. I'm constantly baffled by how little even the most well-known critics know. They will occasionally throw in some game-related terminology to seem more knowledgeable, such as their new version of the game has more polys and stuff, but the short answer for me is remasters of games, in which, all fairness, some remasters are absolutely dire. But then you have games like Demon's Souls Remaster, which is essentially a brand new game that unfortunately people on the internet seem to think all the developers have done is turn the graphics dial all the way up to maximum. Yet Demon's Souls is a full-on remake. Dark Souls Remastered is what I'll look at when I see a remaster. Resolution bump, FPS bump, fresh lighting, and small issues with the original. Demon's Souls was a flat-out remake of the game. Balance. Particularly in asymmetrical settings. The easiest example is to look at an MMO with different damage dealers. Why not just balance the numbers? The first layer is, at what level? Each class spec has its own difficulty curve. If 80% of the player base plays their class at 70% of their potential power, you could balance around that. But that would mean wildly unbalanced classes at the 95th percentile, just because some classes have a higher skill ceiling than others. And calculating the average power of a class is tough when certain player types are drawn to certain class fantasies. There are like a dozen layers below that, but even the first layer of balance is almost unsolvable. And no, the answer isn't balance according to the top 100 players in the world with a YouTube channel. The localization of a game. Every time I read people complaining for a bad translation, which 99% of times is just a preference and style, or because they found a misspelling, I cannot help to raise my eyebrows. AAAs have hundreds of thousands of words in text. They are translated, reviewed and QA'd by multiple people in such a complex process. No matter how many times you review or pass the spelling tool, there will be always something that slips through the cracks, and Butthole in Twitter will rant about how reading of instead of off ruined his whole gaming experience and how better he would do the job instead. Also, translations used to be bad precisely because they were not localization. People would translate Japanese dialogues as is and it sounded terrible in English. Fortunately, all the big companies now use specialized localization teams that take the necessary liberties with the original material so it sounds natural to the local end user. That we can tell managers what is right. That we can tell managers what will not work. That we have any control over what information, right or wrong, is given. Any online fixes. Frick those bugs that are 1/10 of happening. The job in general. Overworked, tired, miserable, and there's no point arguing with your audience. Entitled fricks who think they're owed so much. Sorry, that's just my view. I know a bunch of devs, testers and producers who still love the work and the job. I just fell out of it. Balancing items, weapons, skills in PvP modes. Just because 40 people complain the loudest that a weapon is OP on social media doesn't mean the majority of the community feels the same. Also, when one is testing the balancing within the company before deploying the changes to production, the testers can't be expected to have the same skill level as those out in the wild. So satisfaction will vary. Like juggling chainsaws, and no matter what you do, someone will claim they can do it better than you. We made a 1 vs 1 real-time tower defense game for iOS and Android. Tower Duel. The game allows you to customize your towers and runners with a complex rune system. It's very hard to balance this with a small team, but when you let a couple thousand people play for a week, they will find balance issues in no time. Players are really smart about it. Then if you fix one thing, a new, now broken strategy pops up. Balancing is very hard. To answer some questions, I sometimes work adjacent to people who do game development. One set of causes stems from there being at least 2 code bases. The game is built on top of the engine. Some bugs are from the engine developers and the game developers get to find out about them the hard way. That is in addition to their own bugs or not using the game engine in the most optimal way. Often there are multiple ways to accomplish a task to reach the goal set and not every game developer picks the optimal way to do it. There are plenty of regular schmoes writing code. Not everyone can be a rock star. So, those I consider foundational problems. The game devs are sometimes blamed for code they didn't even write being bad. Cyberpunk pushed the boundaries of the engine hard. It found a lot of game engine shortcomings and probably had some unconventional game code. Bam. Lots of bugs. One word. Programming. I'm not a game developer but I'm a software developer. It's no different if we're talking about game development, banking software, or a mobile application. Users are ignorant on the work that's involved to make even the smallest change. Once the change is done, there's a whole load of testing and quality assurance to do. Just make the change directly in prod. Saves a ton of time on QA. Anti-cheat. People love to act like the game they play is the only one with these problems, but pretty much any game that exists has cheats for it. Yes, some blatant cheats are easier to detect than others, but preventing them is an entirely different problem. Also, there's a fine line on deciding what is the actual limitation of human input. You don't want to punish legit players for being too good at the game. Also, hardware bans are a lot easier to get around than people think. If you're good enough to spoof input alternate code to create a hack yourself, you can very easily spoof your MAC address. It would be so much better if it was made in any other game engine. Besides the fact that the team has to not only learn a whole new engine and programming lang, it would probably not change anything. There is nothing you can do with an engine like Unreal Engine compared to an engine like Unity. It's all up to the programmers and artists. And yes, there are more Unreal games that are considered good looking, but that's because Unreal has that type of lightning out of the box, and that's also why so many Unreal games looks exactly the same. Sorry for the Unreal rant. It's probably a great engine, but so many people saying they should just switch to Unreal is starting to get on my nerves. I made a few text-based games, as I'm more of a writer and less of an artist, depending on how you define the words. It was the biggest complaint, so I started learning how to draw sprites and GIFs to add some dimension to the game. Then the critique was it should be in 3D though. Better graphics isn't something I can just do. It's actually the reason nothing I've worked on was released. If the audience isn't interested, I guess I'm not either. Not a game dev, just a dev, but the answer is literally everything. Armchair devs don't even know what they don't know. Writing code. No, that's not easy. I can't write code with my eyes closed and type 100 words per minute. It takes much more time to get things working than people realize. Making an all-new fighting game character instead of a move clone. Anyone who calls a clone a waste of a slot is dumb as a bag of hammers. As if space on the character select screen is a finite resource, and every character takes the same amount of time to create. People complaining about graphics fidelity, and why isn't this next gen? They've been working on it forever. Well, speaking from my own general experience, unless the studio has been building their game on their own handmade engine, upgrading your game's rendering tech is in most cases like saying you wanna rebuild the game. I could go into so many technical things here, but the gist of it is that games take time to develop. A lot of time. And generally speaking, decisions on the tech used to render are made right at the very beginning, meaning that the tech available at the beginning of development will almost definitely be somewhat or way outdated by the time launch rolls around. As mentioned above, these are not even remotely easy things to pivot on at a certain point or at all, barring maybe some little effects or whatever that can be bolted on. But all this 8K DLSS ray tracing crazy town is not something that you just click a button to enable. Freaking clipping. When the game models overlap one another, or your character goes into a wall, drives me crazy. I got a BA in game development and art, and no matter how many hours I spend animating the hand, they will always clip into some object, whether weapon or interaction. And no matter the type of game, how many checks and fail safes you have, someone will find a way to get that dang character stuck in a wall or box or out of bounds. Former live producer for Star Wars Battlefront 2 here. The big takeaways from our Star Wars Battlefront complaints were, just port maps from Battlefront 1. They are right there for the taking. No, different engine version. So lighting and physics are not the same. Yes, the assets are there, if they port over correctly, but it's rebuilding the entire map. Very little time saved and a lot of uncreative work. Also, if that map used some hooky cheats to make something work and we can't do the same in upgraded engine, everything breaks. Examples. Yoda is smaller than other characters in BF1, so every asset needs to be checked that Yoda cannot slip under anything. Just make this character. See, this mod already does it. Approvals from IP owner are a lot of work, and we could not work with anything that was in works for movies, TV shows unless it was to work in cohesion with that media. The modder used their existing rig and redressed him. That is like 5% of the work. Why can't you release a patch without bugs? Our team was tiny. At certain points you could count us on a pair of hands. At the end there, we were closer to 5 pairs of hands, but it was never a huge team. QA was equally tiny, and yet we produced a lot of content. We were scraping our way to each release. I am sure a lot of live game developers feel the same way. Another one that's pretty common these days with the next gen consoles is, why isn't this game getting a next gen update? Why is the update not free? So and so released their update free of charge. This one cuts on several levels. For one, next gen updates aren't just a magic patch you throw on your code base and presto, you're running 4K at 60 FPS. And usually when devs do release a next gen upgrade, they'll also throw in some other updates, bug fixes, which take a lot of time to track down, debug, fix, test, release. It takes a lot of time, which is money, remember, and doing it for free isn't a privilege every small studio solo developer can afford to do. Wheel support for racing games. I implemented it for the PC version of Need for Speed 2015, with the help of one other programmer and 2 others for configuring sensitivity and other data. 8 popular models. Every single one had its very own idea of how to report its state. As an example, the gas pedal and brake were, between different models, implemented as a pair of analog buttons, a pair of axes, a single axis, with negative meaning brake. Combine this with implementing custom controller mappings and UI things such as button prompts, and this was 3 months of rather arduous work. Honestly, coming up with ideas. For example, a lot of people in the R6 community don't like how futuristic the game has gotten with the gadgets, but there's realistically not that many fun gadgets they could add that would be both useful and also modern. I have said this about Overwatch before as well. Games usually start out with the obvious abilities and gadgets, which then become increasingly off the wall and outside the box, as devs try to come up with new ideas and attempt to keep people interested. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.